Okay. We are on YouTube now. Cool.
Excellent. So Rob, sorry, no, Steph, you will see the comments on YouTube. Have you got that somewhere running
Yep.
as well?
Yeah. I have
Awesome.
I have a screen with the comments. I can see how many people are tuning in, all that stuff. So I'll try and monitor that a bit while we are talking about things. Unless things get really heated, of course, then I'll forget about everything else that's happening. There's already people tuning in. One person right now.
Woohoo! Great. Welcome.
We're ramping up. Three persons. We're getting there. Four persons. Okay, cool. Hello, people. Welcome, everybody. I don't know. For some people, it's probably really late. Other people, it's early. So that's a tricky part. We had to find a slot that worked for all of us, of course. But I think we'll manage to do, and I hope some people will look at this video afterwards as well. I think that will be the main case, right?
Yeah,
But
pretty unfortunate for the U.S. It's 11 p.m. here, so New York it's 2. So I hope there aren't too many people in the U.S. watching live, but it'd be great if they watch the recap.
yeah, sure. Well, people in the that are watching the live stream, let us know where you're watching from, what time it is at your place. We'd love to know who is watching, and if you have any questions, of course, this is a live conversation, so go ahead and shoot any questions. Hey, Amin is already joining in the chat. So yeah, maybe just a small. It's 8 a.m. here. Somebody tells us so. Straight, same area as mine, I suppose. So let's just dive in with a little intro before we actually get started on the whole debate. So I just wanted to maybe give a quick idea on why we started this whole idea, the big brand debate, because me, Rob, and Ilya, and Good Day Frank, Reagan, his real name, I always call him Frank. It's easier. We were talking about like on Instagram, there are some carousels, and we always have this debate, and I have this slightly different perspective on some of these things based on some books I've read and some other stuff. And we were always jabbing like, let's do a debate, let's have a conversation about this. And I mean, I've seen these conversations everywhere on the internet: branding versus marketing, all these things, brand differentiation. Hi, Victor from Nigeria. Frank is also dropping in saying, that whiskey, Rob, you've made me pour one myself. Okay, so Frank is not joining the debate; he's just drinking whiskey instead. Good idea.
Yeah,
Um,
literally.
but so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of these discussions based on branding, marketing. People from different industries talking about what a brand is, what brand differentiation is, loyalty, all of this stuff. And so that's why we decided to have this debate, just to bring some different perspectives to the table and hopefully maybe get some common ground on what we all believe to be true, because we all are in the business of building brands, as Rob mentions in his podcast often. So I think that's the core where we all tend to work around, but we do have different perspectives based on how we work, what we've learned, who we are looking up to. So that's what we're trying to do here today. And so I have a small schedule so we can see a little bit what we're planning to do today. So first, introduction, done, check. Second part, guests. We'll just run briefly through each of us, just do a small intro. Then we'll get in definition round. That doesn't mean we have to have like set definitions ready on all of these things, but just each of us tries to give somewhat of an objective take of what brand differentiation means for them, and maybe some context to that. And then the next part is opinions, where we again do like a little bit of a carousel, where we each give our take on maybe what we think about brand differentiation, what's wrong with it, what's right with it, what is your opinion on this whole topic. And then the part after that is where the gloves come off, basically. So that's where we really can start jabbing in. And then finally, let's hopefully also try to get some takeaways from all of this discussion, and maybe see if we learn something from each other, and if it's not all just, no, you're wrong and I'm right, and then that sort of stuff. Hey, Caro, 2 a.m. Nice. Am I? That's
Dedication.
cool.
That's dedication.
Dedication.
Yeah,
Thank you.
really.
Thank you, Kyler, for tuning in. So we already have 10 people watching. So very cool. Thank you all for joining us. But maybe let's just get started with a little introduction round for the guests. So let's start with Ilya. Maybe you could introduce yourself real quickly, and then Rob, and then I'll just do a small intro as well, and then we can get going.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Stef. My intro will be brief. So I'm a creative director and founder of Studeo, which is my essentially my agency that I run for helping businesses to build brands. And I would call myself a strategic designer before I call myself a brand strategist. And brand strategy is only something that I've kind of looked more and more in depth in the last maybe 3 to 4 years. And before that, I was purely just kind of creating deliverables, but I was always trying to approach things from a strategic point of view, whether it was a logo or a website or any other kind of marketing materials. And so for me, I really resonate with this latest trend, I guess you can call it, which is the kind of customer-centric branding, which is probably the reason why we're even having this kind of debate in the first place, is because I think that there's that whole there's like those two camps, the marketers who have this, the kind of the traditional marketing approach, and kind of designers or brand strategists who have come from this new place where they kind of have this more of a, let's focus on the customer first. And not to say that that wasn't present in the marketing beforehand, but it's just something that's, I guess, the branding people have taken more of a lean on in the recent days, and therefore, I guess why we're having this sort of chats and slightly different views. But I think we're all coming from the same place, but I think we just have, a slightly different tower or from which we're sitting and viewing everything. So that's me.
Cool. Rob?
Yeah, Rob Meyerson. I run How Brands Are Built, which is a podcast and also a blog. I also run my own agency called Heirloom, doing brand strategy work and quite a bit of naming and messaging, voice, brand architecture. My background, I guess I can differentiate myself from these other two guys. I think I'm the only one here that's not a designer at all. I have no design background. It's been brand strategy and just brand strategy for a little over 15 years at a lot of the big agencies. One thing I think it's relevant to the conversation is kind of, I came up through these consultancies. And so a lot of the way I think about branding and topics like differentiation is informed by what you learn working on the job at those places. That's not at all to say that it's correct, but I do think, I'd love to kind of get into how these brand consulting agencies think about it. I know that Stef and I don't know, maybe Ilya also have a very different point of view. So I think that's a kind of an interesting way to look at this. But I've been doing this for a while at big agencies, small agencies, and on the client side, and now doing quite a bit of naming work as well. But really, brand strategy and naming are kind of my focus.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that's we talked about that, right? We wanted some diversity of opinion. So I think it's good that we have people from at least different types of backgrounds, different types of areas as well. We'd love to get even more diversity in terms of color and gender and everything, basically. But this is just a starting point of hopefully a series of discussions where we'll loop other guests in and hopefully get as broad of a view on these topics. So thanks for those intros. Maybe just Rob, continue on with what your just definition, or at least what you think brand differentiation is. What comes to mind when you hear that?
So so going back to kind of these fundamental beliefs that you hear when you start working in brand strategy, or at least that I did back in 2005 or so. You hear that sort of three things that brands need to do is be credible, relevant, and differentiating. And different consultancies will use different words for those things. One thing that I've pointed out, and we can talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about tonight, is that some companies will swap in distinctive instead of differentiated. Those terms are often used, in my experience at least, interchangeably, for better or worse. But those three ideas are kind of core tenets, I think, of brand strategy as they're taught or as it's done inside of brand consultancies. I'm hesitating a little because there's very little training. There isn't sort of a manual when you get to work at Interbrand or Siegel and Gale or any of these big agencies that says this is how it works. A lot of it is kind of training on the job. And I will be the first to admit, I've always felt that a lot of it is kind of dogma. It's just, if you ask questions, it's just kind of like, well, this is just the way it works. And it'll be proven, quote unquote, with anecdotes as opposed to evidence or data. They'll tell you to go read, I think I might have it here. They'll tell you to go read Positioning by Al Ries, which is a fantastic book, but the least scientific thing that you could read. So that's how I kind of understand it. And then in terms of what differentiation means, I guess I just sort of took it at face value that it's how do you stand apart in the market. And I know that because of Byron Sharp and others, there's this relatively recent effort to drive some distinction between differentiation being a sort of deeper level, more meaningful way that a brand is different, and distinctiveness, the way I think of it at least, is more kind of superficial or tactical. It could be as little as owning a color or having a very different looking logo. I always thought of that as kind of one continuum. You can be differentiated at any of those points or all of those points. And I think they're all important. I do think it's interesting to talk about the relative value of differentiating at different kind of parts of that continuum. But it seems to me, and Stef, I'll hand it to you next, unless Ilya, you want to weigh in. It seems to me like some of the Byron Sharp stuff maybe puts a little too much on the, differentiation is not important and distinctiveness is all important. I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, there's so many things I'd love to unpick, but I'm going to let Ilya just give his take first on brand differentiation as well. I think better before we get like the most opposing opinion to get, I think, Ilya, who's probably going to be a little bit more aligned. I'm not sure though. So Ilya, what is brand differentiation for you?
So I think I'm probably in the middle, and actually I don't know if I'm in the middle of the live stream or not, but I'm actually I reckon I'm somewhere in the middle from an opinion. Yeah. So I think for me, brand differentiation is something that you do through a process of brand positioning. So you try to find a place in the market, or a vacant place, if you like, in the minds of the consumers, or just a place within the market, to try and position yourself as something unique and something as essentially worthy of a choice, of a consumer or customer's choice, as opposed to picking a different brand over yours. And brand distinctiveness is something that's more of those kind of surface things, like the brand identity and maybe messaging styles. That could be a logo, that could be a name, that could be like a mascot or something, where it's something that you put out there into the world that's visibly you, something that you can experience tangibly, that you can see visually or audibly. That's something that's different from a competitor. So those are kind of two views that I have on what differentiation and distinctiveness is, but we can get more into the guts of it further into the debate, I think.
Awesome. So yeah, I think a lot of it already been said. For me, brand differentiation, the way I look at it, of course, again, after have read Byron Sharp's work, which has been fundamental in shifting my thinking. So I think that is really important. I think if we would have done this conversation 2 years ago, there would have been no discussion. I would have been thinking about the same way as Ilya did and same way as Rob did. I positioned brands. I thought about them as being meaningfully different. But then I started reading that work of Byron Sharp. And so I'd like to take his take on what differentiation means. He specifically means differentiation in the context of meaningful differentiation. That means that for a customer, a brand is meaningfully different than another one. So that means Apple for you has different meaning, different associations, is different than, let's say, Microsoft. That means that you perceive that brand to be something else, something special. Hopefully that's why you buy more of it, right? I mean, that's the whole idea. This whole thinking, by the way, originated in Philip Kotler's thinking, which is he's a famous marketing person, and also a lot of thinking around positioning, like Al Rees, the book that Rob mentioned, which is really the idea that you have to find. Ilya also mentioned that you have to find a slot in people's
Niche.
mind, or you have to capture somewhat of a place in people's mind, and that is where it is. It's a battle for the mind, right? That's the idea. It's not an old idea. It's a very, very old idea, actually. And so the big distinction here is effectively between differentiation and distinctiveness. So if we look at it from Byron Sharp's world, the difference is differentiation is about trying to be different, meaningfully different. Again, that word meaningfully helps there a lot, because if you say visual differentiation, that's the same as distinctiveness for me, right? So distinctiveness is making sure you can be distinguished from other brands. It's very simple. If you look at brand A and brand B, can you understand that those are different brands? Can you recognize them? And that's through the development of distinctive brand assets, which are basically things that we call like logos, colors, but also faces, shapes, smells, all of the things that you experience when you encounter a brand or a touch point or a communication. Those are distinctive brand assets, right? Those are the things that people recognize and they get familiar with. So that's distinctiveness. Distinctiveness, that's like the key part for me here. It's like, why would you make such a big discussion about this nuance? But I think there is a big difference. Ilya mentions it's like surface level versus a more deeper thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's brand differentiation is considered to be that more deeper level, where it's more about people really understanding that you're doing something different, offering something different, positioning yourself differently, versus just how you look, how you feel, how you sound, how you smell. That's basically, I think, the context for it.
Yeah.
And
so,
I can, sorry, Rob, go in.
No. Are we allowed to interrupt each other now? Are we at that?
Sure.
Are we at the gloves off?
The next part is like, now we have to give our opinion, and then we can take the gloves off. But we can start already, actually. But I do have like a part where I just wanted to say what I think is wrong with brand differentiation. But if you want to ask the question,
no, I want to hear that. Go ahead.
Sure. So I think the biggest issue is that people in branding, they overrate the effects on brand growth that differentiation has. I mean, we see differentiation almost as the holy grail. You mentioned, for example, Rob, you mentioned 3 things. I think there were credible, relevant, and differential. Right. A lot of people, I see a lot of posts, I see a lot of carousels where it's like branding is differentiation. Branding is about being different. Branding is about making sure brands or businesses are considered different. And the reality is that differentiation, as like meaningful differentiation, again, the science part has shown us, and that's specifically in Byron Sharp's book, that actually brands are not meaningfully differentiated. There is no, if you do consumer research, if you look at market share, all of these things, there is no proof to be found that people perceive brands to be meaningfully different from each other. That's the whole basis of what Byron Sharp's book is about. He looks at brands at different scales, and the reality is that if you look at, let's say, any category, any type of brand, any type of industry, you sort them on their size, so the amount of market share they have, then you will see that the amount of loyalty brands have, so the amount of people buying and repeat buying stuff from them, it's just correlated perfectly with the size of the brand. So that means that the bigger the brand, the more people buy it the more frequently. And the smaller the brand, the less people buy it and the less loyal they are. So you would say in a world where differentiation exists, that doesn't make sense, right? Because small brands that are highly differentiated should have excreasingly more loyalty than other brands. So that's where this whole science part comes in, where it's like Byron Sharp says, there's no proof to be found. For example, I'm going to give you one stat and I'll wrap it up with that. There's 72% of Coca-Cola buyers, also drinks Pepsi. What that means is that when we think about branding, we often give these examples like, yeah, you have Coca-Cola people and you have Pepsi people, and there's this whole thing. It's the same with Apple. And you might even say, well, yeah, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, these are FMCG products. They're fast moving. It's not that differentiated. But in reality, we talk a lot about these things, but we see that most people that drink Coca-Cola also drink Pepsi. And what that means is that for people, it doesn't really matter as much as we like to think it does. That's my biggest beef with brand differentiation, is as a driver of brand growth and as an idea that people will flock to you because you're special or different. I think that's wrong. That's my point.
Okay, Rob, do you want to go or do you want me to?
Now it's gloves off. Go.
I'll try to keep it short, Ilya, because I want to make sure we're really kind of all chatting here. But I guess I'll say a couple of things. You won't get an argument from me about brand loyalty being overblown, and I thank Byron Sharp for doing the work to maybe convince some people in branding that that's a misguided phrase. Even I mean, it's never made much sense to me. I assume that all of us and everybody watching, in our own experience, will say, of course, if we like Coke, we're going to drink Pepsi. We might have a preference, but this idea of loyalty to the degree that we would actually turn down something because our favorite is not available, or, if I'm a Coke drinker, but Pepsi's half price this week, I'm not going to, there are not a lot of people out there, at least, that are that loyal. I've always felt like loyalty is kind of it's an exaggerated word. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that his data has kind of proven that out. Where I feel like I depart a little bit from him. I was excited to read his book because, like I said, I had always felt that a lot of these ideas in brand consulting were a bit dogmatic and were not questioned enough. And so I was glad to hear there was a book out there that was doing exactly that, and read it, with some excitement. But when I got to this part about differentiation, we can get into the specifics of the research that he's done. I don't find it all that convincing. But I guess maybe an easier place to start, one of the first things that popped into my head, and Ilya, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, is this idea of differentiation, maybe not being an attempt to get customers to think that your brand is differentiated, which is basically what his research is looking at, but as a way to determine how to create distinctive assets. So maybe I'll put that out there first. Is it possible that coming up with a differentiated brand strategy in order to then guide the creation of a set of coherent, distinctive brand assets makes sense? And Stef, I'm curious if that resonates at all with you, but Ilya, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, Ilya, hop in, man.
How long do we have about this? Because I can talk about this all day. I'll give you a quick.
Stef and I have been talking all night, so please weigh in.
I'll just give you a quick, just a little bit of context as to why I feel this way, so you can maybe understand my point of view, where I'm coming from. So, as I mentioned, the brand strategy is only something I've been kind of, officially looking into in the last couple of years. But before that, I was developing, brands essentially without me realizing. I was creating logos, I was creating some assets for brands, and I was always trying to question, like, do you really need a logo? Like I always had that feeling when the client came to me for a logo type, I'd be asking them like, why? What do you expect it for it to do? Are you just saying that you need a logo because everyone else has a logo? like people didn't really value, a logo. So to me, that was an early red flag as to just having a logo. I can make it the most distinctive, beautiful piece of logotype or design, but if it doesn't have some sort of a meaning to it, it's, for me, there was still that disconnect. Like, why would the customers pick a logo of like a bull or something instead of me drawing a monkey, for example? Like, what's like, if there's no connection to some kind of a thought or big idea. So and that was my biggest thing with the junior designers and senior designers that I've ever worked with, that had that approach where they would just say, just tell me what the logo should be. I just make a nice balanced logo. And I was always thinking, no, it has to have some kind of a meaning to it. Like, it doesn't have to tell you the whole entire story about the brand, but at least it has to feel cohesive when you put together all of the brand touch points in front of a customer. The customer goes through like, hundreds and hundreds of different touch points, advertisements, websites, and all kinds of things, right? So when they see all of those things together, I feel like they have to have the same experience, if you like, or the same get the same sort of feeling from all of those touch points. So if I give you 9 touch points which tell me that your brand is super friendly and helps humans, but then, I don't know, your logo is like a picture of a robot or something, and something really technological, you won't know as a consumer why it's wrong, but you'll get that feeling that something is off. You'll still make that emotional, psychological connection that something is off. So I think everything has to be cohesive, and that's why I think where that brand differentiation comes into it, in terms of, as Rob mentioned, as a platform to create the brand assets, or the distinctive brand assets. And yes, you can create distinctive brand assets without brand positioning or brand differentiation, but will it be as effective? I don't believe so. And the kind of the stats, I'm more in the camp with Rob from the stats perspective. From Byron Sharp, for example, where he argues that we've asked the consumers and said, what's the percentage of people that believe this brand is unique, and like only 20% said we believe this brand is unique. I don't frankly give a shit what the consumers think, because exactly as Rob said, this is not an exercise of us proving that consumers believe that this brand is unique. It's more of an underlying kind of experience that we're providing for them. And as we know, all consumers make purchasing decisions psychologically, and then we convince ourselves rationally afterwards why we made that choice. So I believe what brand differentiation does is actually putting that psychological foundations for you choosing the brand over another. It's not something that can be proven with data and statistics, and that's my whole beef with this statistical approach to it. If you ever seen Rory Sutherland, I know, Stef, you had him on your podcast before.
Yeah, he's awesome. I love his book. I have it right here.
Yeah, so he talks about, I don't know, I watched a presentation he gave about, I think it was about digital marketing, and he talks about big data. And, he's like, if you watch that presentation, you'll understand kind of my perspective of it, because I'm so aligned with how he sees it. He basically says 7 times 10 is not the same as 70 times 1. Like, just because the data says something, we know that we make decisions more psychologically than we. It's that financial aspect that says, no, we have to rely on big data and numbers. But branding, we know it's more, whether you believe that definition by Martin Neumeier, that it's a gut feeling, a perception. I think we can all agree that branding is still somewhat ambiguous, and the reason why it's ambiguous is because it's kind of underlying. It's not something tangible that we can put numbers and figures next to. It's something kind of deeper. That's why a lot of definitions hang around that area of emotion and experience and your gut feeling, and it's what people say behind you when you're not in the room. So all of those things, it's all of the intangible stuff that goes behind brand building. But anyway, I'll pause there, and I think maybe I'll
I want to get into it, man. I want to get into it. There's so much here. No. What's really funny, by the way, and I think that is the difficulty about this type of debate is, like, for example, Rory Sutherland is somebody who also aligns with what Byron Sharp has written. So it's not that these things cannot coexist while they're somewhat opposing. And I think the big problem is when people hear about Byron Sharp and they say, whoa, there's a lot of data involved. It sounds like it's this new big data thing, but actually like Aaron Bear Bus Institute, the thing where Byron Sharp, the university where he comes from, that's like these principles are been written, that these are laws that have been written like, I don't know, 60 years or 100 years ago. I don't know the exact dates, but this is a really old scientific algorithm almost. So it's not like it's something new. But the thing is, the research doesn't look at, because you mentioned like they ask people, would you think this brand is differentiated? The research mostly looks, I think 99% of it is looking at buying behavior. So actual behavior, not asking people, because that's actually the biggest problem. If you ask people why they buy, they say we buy because we believe or because we value, and that's the problem actually. Because if you look at buying behavior, it's not true. So that's the real problem here, is that a lot of people in branding, but also in general, think they buy because of certain reasons, and that's why how we also shape brands. We're very biased on how we shape brands. We shape brands based on beliefs and purpose and stuff because we believe that's how we actually buy. But we're also kind of fooling ourselves there, because actually if we look at the behavior, it's not that much. The things we really buy, if we look at behavior, and this is because you mentioned psychology, Ilya, I think this is exactly what the whole Byron Sharp's world is built on. It's built on neuroscience, on psychology. It's this idea that we are, as people, we don't buy rationally, we don't even buy emotionally, we buy basically almost unconsciously. You have the idea of system 1 and system 2 thinking, system 1 being your automatic pilot. It's the thing where you make most of the decisions with, like 80% of your decisions are made without you consciously being part of them. And that part, that first system, I think it's called limbic or something in the brain, that part has a lot of shortcuts to do things, to make decisions. And one of the biggest ones here is familiarity. It's the idea that if you know something, you'll buy it, you'll trust it. And that's why brands are so important, because once they are familiar, you keep buying them. But it's almost that's almost where it stops in terms of how we buy. Most of it is almost automatically and based on a lot of those things. So just to anchor, because I think it's not, Byron Sharp's work is not opposed to psychology, it's not opposed to emotional branding, it's not opposed to even illogical thinking. It's actually very much founded in the idea that people don't care about brands. People don't think about how they buy. People are just like, they do things, they have a lot more important stuff. And the moment you realize that that is the case, I think you can start building brands based on just trying to get their attention and then having this very simple and cohesive system. And that's just one more part I want to get into, because I think you, Ilya and Rob, both mentioned this idea of differentiation being the platform for distinctive assets. I think that's a great idea. I mean, that's how I often did it and still often do. But my point is, it doesn't have to be. And it almost feels, I think, to a lot of branding people, it almost feels like, okay, but then you don't really have something creative or something to build off. I think for me, that's the whole thing. I mean, some companies are differentiated in the sense that they have a very cool founding story, a very crazy product, a very disruptive model, whatever it is. If that's the case, you can build a differentiated brand on top. But if it's not the case, you don't have to differentiate them. You can build on what makes them them, what makes them distinctive. And that's I think something very important to understand, that difference here, that we don't have to differentiate every brand for it to be distinctive, to be strong, and to be cohesive. I think we're equating brand strategy with differentiation here. And that's not necessary for me. For me, brand strategy is trying to understand the context of the market, the consumer, and then building a brand that successfully enhances the business strategy. And that's kind of the idea for brand strategy for me. It's a platform that bridges business strategy with branding and marketing efforts. And so I think I'm going to leave it at that, because I already mentioned a lot of things. So I don't know if you guys want to pick in on something.
Yeah.
Somebody else wants to say something.
It sounds like it. I guess a couple of thoughts. And I feel like we're having two conversations at once, so it's hard to pick which one to kind of dig into more.
True.
Let's see. So first off, we found a point of agreement. It sounds like that's nice that we all feel like differentiation at the very least can be used as a tool to determine a way to create distinctive brand assets. I guess one thing about Sharp's work and what you just said, Stef, that there's this feeling I get from it that I haven't quite been able to articulate, unfortunately. And part of the reason I was excited to dial in tonight is to see if I could spontaneously figure out how to say this. It's not quite coming to me, but I get this sense that there's a little bit of this sort of fait accompli to it, that he seems to keep sort of saying that what determines whether or not a brand succeeds in the marketplace is almost like how successful it has been up to this point. I get this sense that it's like big brands get bigger and hold on to their market share, and smaller brands don't. And that, I'm sure, it's true and is borne out in the numbers, but it also doesn't feel like it gives us. It basically, to me, then says, then what's the point
in branding?
What's the point in branding, or what's the point in trying to shift those? Not like, how do you then shift those numbers? Because we don't have unlimited resources. And even going back to positioning, like I read that book as kind of saying that, we don't have unlimited money to just put ads everywhere. Of course, if we did that, we all know that would be super effective. If people saw our brand everywhere, we've maximized salience, to use Sharp's term, then sure, that would be great. But we can't afford to do that. And so then you get into questions about, how do you strategically use your money? And of course, there's all kinds of marketing science around, are billboards more effective than social media advertising and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. But there's also this question that I think branding gets to is sort of what is the optimal message to send, or the optimal way to present ourselves, which is positioning. And that's where the differentiation came in. So I don't know. I just feel like sometimes I scratch my head when I read what Sharp's written, because I just feel like he's kind of closing out all options for there to be any reason to do not just differentiation, but to do strategy work or something. It's like, we'll just spend and show up everywhere and have a bright yellow logo. And that's all there is to it. And again, I'm sure that's true if you have enough money to spend. But at some point, this is about very small differences on the margins, right? I don't think that, positioning a brand one way or the other is necessarily going to be the difference every single time between success or failure for the company. But we're trying to find an edge. I mean, all of marketing and branding is about trying to find this little edge where maybe we can be a little more profitable or grow a little bit faster than we would have otherwise. And so, I'm not really interested in a solution that just says, show up everywhere all the time and you'll win. I need to know that there are... Because
you can't, right? You don't have the money for it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, they'll like the joke about half my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. I mean, that's where strategy kind of comes into play. So I don't know, that's one thought, and I'd welcome your guys' response to that. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, I have some thought, but maybe Ilya, you want to dive in first on some things mentioned?
Yeah, so I think the whole question about big data or analytics or statistics, so to kind of anchor to what you were saying, Stef, is I wasn't saying that big data is totally bullshit or that it's completely useless. I was just saying that, as Rob pointed out, I do get the same feeling that, Byron Sharp and people who kind of follow that sort of thinking, they probably are not in the balance. They actually are putting a lot more emphasis on the big data. And I think that's dangerous, because you always have to, try to back that up with some kind of countermeasure. So you can't just have all just big data and analytics. After all, we are human, and so we, as you mentioned, Steph, we are making those purchasing decisions almost on that subconscious level, on that that limbic brain is taking care of a lot of the decision making. So to me, that automatically makes no sense. Why would you use data then to try and control that? If your limbic brain doesn't care about the numbers, it actually cares about that underlying feeling somewhere in whatever that driving force is. So, and a lot of the time, what drives that is we're not so much buying the brand that where we're buying maybe necessarily more superior product in a lot of senses, but we are actually buying a product where we're trying to reduce the probability of buying a bad product, and that's what branding does. And so I think from a salience point of view, from whatever, I don't know if people are familiar with that term who might be
awareness
watching,
or yeah. Whatever
it's like kind of like a lot of different things brought into one, like the memory of a brand that comes up for you if you're kind of thinking of a market or a industry. I guess it can be also attention, when you're thinking of a so I guess what's salience, brand salience is ability to either for the consumer to either remember your product or service through long-term efforts by that brand, or it's the consumer getting the attention from another brand for that particular brand or service at the point of when they're making that sort of purchasing decision. And a lot of that depends also on brand reputation. So as you said, Steph, obviously the brand that's been there for 20, 30, 50 years, it's most likely to have the lion's share of sales, just because they have the brand salience. They have the people know about their product. So it's like I'd rather buy a Samsung television than I would buy for maybe $2,000, rather than I would buy something from AliExpress or whatever for $50, which might prove to be the exact same product, but I'd still rather make the choice of reducing my probability of buying a crappy television by buying a Samsung. It might not be because I'm loyal to Samsung, but it's just that over the years I know that they've kind of proven themselves to be a reputable brand, if you like, because they've just been going at it for a while. So I think so that's one aspect of the kind of conversation about obviously brand salience. So, but that's not to say the brand differentiation is inherently wrong or unnecessary, and I think that's why we have these lines of thinking like Simon Sinek and Martin Neumeier, where we have that kind of more customer-centric approach from, as you say, Steph, a lot of, I guess, Byron Sharp's followers would say, well, we don't need this meaningful kind of backstory. We can just make something distinctive, and we know from the data that people will buy as long as we make it distinctive. But I don't know if that's true, see, that's the thing with big data. Like for me, whenever anyone mentions any statistics, regardless whether it's like vaccination or COVID statistics or anything, I say call bullshit on all of them, because when you have statistics or science, what do you do in scientific experiments? You have two control groups. You have two, and you test it for years and years, and you have massive numbers to be able to even see what the difference is, and even then, it's arguable that whether that's correct. So, if, for example, Byron Sharp were to go and create two identical brands, one had the brand differentiation and distinctive assets, and another identical brand that just has the distinctiveness but no differentiation, and then run those for 10, 15 years, 20 years, and do everything identically apart from those two, different components, and repeat that process maybe 1,000, maybe 10,000 times. Maybe then I'll listen to the statistics, because to me that's the only way you can actually test.
That's what he did, actually.
Well, how?
No, but
I hear what Ilya is saying, that it's impossible. Any experiment is, you can attack it on whether it's really representative, whether it can be extrapolated to every real world experience. And I think that's valid. But I will say, I mean, in Sharp's defense, I'm totally in favor of any kind of data that tries to explain consumer or customer behavior and poke holes in the dogma again. So it's not so much that he's doing. I'm glad there are people doing science on branding and marketing and trying to.
Sorry to interrupt you there, but just one thing, I do think like that's what almost always happens when I'm talking about Byron Sharp is people immediately start saying that it's I mean it's statistics and you can prove anything with statistics, but it's probably the
Yeah, no.
most like the best scientific book that's out there in terms of methods, in terms of looking at the market, in terms of scale, in terms of sample size, in terms of everything. So it is a sample set that is probably better than all, because if we look at books like Marty Neumeyer, positioning, all of the, there's not a single piece
Right.
of data in there, not a single
No,
piece.
it's
So
all anecdotal.
we do need to
With all due
consider
respect
that,
to those guys.
no. I mean, I love Marty and all of these people, but they base it on basically what they feel. And I think when I think about branding and when I thought about branding, it makes sense, differentiation. It made sense as a human being. It's how we perceive things. But sometimes these things aren't true on a bigger scale, and that doesn't mean that it gives us enough material to build brands on. And I think that's where the issue here is. Byron Sharp's work is descriptive of what happens in markets. It's not prescriptive. It doesn't tell you what to do and how to build brands. And so if you want to use differentiation to build brands, and the outcome is you create a distinctive brand and it grows and it works, I mean, by all means, go ahead. That's not a problem. I'm not saying that brand differentiation is wrong. I'm saying brand differentiation is not a driver of brand growth. That's the part where I'm saying, and why I'm saying that is because I do believe most people in branding think that if we create a brand that's really, really uniquely positioned, people will prefer it over the other brand. And I think there's an error there in that thinking, and science has proven that. And one more thing I do want to say, that it feels like Byron Sharp's work and all of these things, it's kind of like for branding people, it's a kind of like an assault on their way of working. But the reality is what Byron Sharp is giving us is actually like powder for clients to tell them like branding is the most important part. It's key. He says like, if you don't have distinctiveness, it doesn't matter how much you advertise. It doesn't matter what you do, even your product, everything else. He says branding is essential, but he does refer to branding mostly as that, let's call it distinctive layer, which is still, I mean, how do you develop messaging, tonal assets, colors? You need a concept, you need a story, you need emotional thing to build that brand on top of. Is that a differentiated story? I don't know. I don't care. For me, I just look at what's there. I look at the marketplace and I make sure it works. But I think Byron Sharp is not like negating anything of branding. He's just telling us like the things that work are the things we see, we feel, we hear, we interact with. Positioning, like if you would ask a million people about all the brands in their fridge or they're wearing, they would not be able to like recall any of the positioning or differentiation of any of these brands. So those are the hard facts. There are always loyal and heavy buyers that do know their brands and why they exist, but most of the people don't. And if you want to, again, this is very important, if you want to grow your brand, to make it a big brand, then you have to follow these rules. If you want to create a small brand for a niche audience, and just do that, that's okay. That's not what I'm trying to say here. I'm saying like, if you really want to become the market leader, then at a certain point, you'll have to adhere to these principles, which are like target everyone in the category, be distinctive. All of the things where we think opposite, target everyone in the category. Everybody in branding will tell you, no, if you target everyone, you will reach no one, right? That's the idea.
Yes, that is another.
Sorry for the big rant, by the way.
No, it's another piece of dogma. God, there's a couple of things I want to drop into the conversation. One is, and we haven't quite talked about this, I guess. I'll connect these two things. One is that we started the conversation talking about these two, differentiation versus distinctiveness, and talking about whether this sort of the same thing or different. I guess part of the issue with me is that calling them two things is problematic, not because I think they're the same, but because I think maybe there's a continuum. You know, it's almost, I don't think everything is just distinctiveness and just superficial, we could point to some things that are maybe like just changing a color. But it's something Ilya said when he was talking about TVs made me think of, there are kind of levels here, right? Like you could have a TV that's identical except for the color that the box it comes in. But then you could have one that has some kind of some frivolous little feature. This TV comes with, remember TVs that used to light up the wall behind them? Ridiculous. Like nobody needed that, but it was just something unique. To maybe a feature that's a little bit less frivolous. And so it's this continuum all the way down to this is really, they've created an entirely new category. This is a truly 3D TV or something. It's the first one on the market. And I feel like just putting things into differentiated versus distinctiveness ignores the fact that, and really it sort of ignores the way that, in my experience, we actually go about doing this with our clients is you would love to, and I think even Byron Sharp says this, like you would love to be truly differentiated, right? You would love to have a product that nobody else has. That's gold, right? But the reality is almost no one ever has that. And if they do have it, they don't have it for long. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you then switch completely to this then just make sure your logo is a different color. I feel like in practice, you look at your client and you say, okay, well, in some cases it's unique. In some cases, there are two competitors that do pretty much the same thing. So can we differentiate ourselves in a sort of deep, meaningful way, not just with like a positioning line that's meaningless and that nobody's ever going to remember, but is there something we could do differently? Is there, something we can offer that is unique? And maybe it's a feature, maybe it's something kind of small. And yeah, if all of those efforts are fruitless, then maybe you get to the point where you're saying, okay, well, at the very least, our logo can be a different color than everybody else's, and so at least we'll stand out. I do, I'll admit some of the stuff you said, Steph, really resonates. I do think there's a lot of defensiveness from some sort of old school brand consulting people that feel like this is an attack on the dogma. And as much as I recognize it as dogma, I think I'm not immune to that. I feel like I'm a little bit defensive, but I do think that allowing for that continuum really kind of changes the conversation from do this or do that to like do all of it, or at least try to do all of it, and pick your point at which you feel like you can make your brand stand out in the mind, sorry, I'm using old school language there, to make it distinctive, right, on the shelf. And if you can do that by having a truly unique product, that's great. If you can't, maybe there's something you could do short of that. The reason it also comes to mind, and here's the other point that I wanted to connect it to, is I don't know if you hear this stuff, but I read a lot of people saying that they agree with Sharp, except for a couple of cases where brands have truly been unique. And people will cite Tesla, and people will cite Red Bull, which always kind of cracks me up. To me, like Red Bull is an example of a product that is not unique. It's basically soda, but they differentiated it, or they created like a story around it that makes it seem like maybe it's an entirely different category. And David Ocker's latest book is on this as well, this creating game-changing subcategories. It's like, it gets a little bit fuzzy for me between, are you really creating an entirely new category, or are you just spinning a story that makes it sound like you've created a new category? And I think, there are some things we could point to and say that's clearly bullshit. They're just making it sound like they've created something new. But there's a lot of wiggle room in between where something like Red Bull is kind of a new category, but kind of just soda with an extra ingredient. And so I think there's, again, a lot of room in there where that is brand strategy work and arguably differentiation work that I think potentially makes a difference.
Yeah, I like the spectrum.
A lot of those.
I think we can all agree on the idea. So Ilya, go ahead if you want to pick in on that.
Well, I just there's two things that I wanted to point out, I guess, because it's come up, I guess, mostly in your conversation, Steph, is that we keep talking about the biggest brands essentially gets with the biggest dollar spend gets the choice of the consumer, right? And we can't obviously argue with that, but but to me, that again, that doesn't really prove that differentiation doesn't work. That just proves that the bigger you are, the bigger money you have, then obviously you're going to be more top of mind and better salience. But so what I just want to kind of maybe draw the line here with just between the three of us, and maybe you guys can disagree, but I don't know, probably most people watching this, and probably between the three of us, I can probably safely say that we might not be creating a brand strategy for Coca-Cola or McDonald's or Tesla in the near future. Most likely, we're working with small business owners, medium to small business owners, whether they might be a B2B or B2C business. And in that space, I don't know if the same rules apply, like in terms of the they certainly do. If you have more money to spend on a dollar, you'll still win ultimately. But in that space, I guess there's less of the threshold or the differences between the really small brand and the really large brand. So if you're playing that specific market pocket, you're competing likely with similar sized businesses, which are tend to be kind of smaller to medium. And I think there where the differentiation really comes into play, because you don't when you're making, like, say, as a consumer, when you're making a decision between I don't know, like internet provider or something for your office or for your home, I don't know that you're making it based on the logo and what they look like, what they sound like necessarily. Maybe that's part of it, but a lot of things you're just comparing things, like if when you're comparing airlines, you're looking for the cheapest most likely, or most likely, unless you're really loyal to Virgin, you're not really looking for Virgin necessarily. You're just looking for the cheapest ticket. You go into kayak.com or whatever, one of those compare sites. You punch in your destination and you pick the cheapest tickets to take you there, most likely. So I mean, it's and differentiation where it comes in is in other sectors. I think like in the more of like if you're B2B business and trying to pick like software that's going to run your business, then you're more likely to pick a software platform that does the specific things that you are looking for, rather than just base it on what it looks like or what the logo looks like, because you're really concerned about what business results is going to bring you. And so I think that's one kind of component that I wanted to mention, just as far as the sizes of the brand that you work with. I think it matters from a brand differentiation, or what kind of strategy work do you do for them. And I think that's probably an important thing to raise too, because here we're talking about Coca-Cola and Google and all of these massive organizations. That's fantastic, but the people who are listening to this, they'll be going, okay, well, what do I do if I'm working with Joe Blogs, down this corner street, and he's competing, let's say, with McDonald's or something?
Yeah.
Like, how do you have to find some way to be unique, and then to kind of piggyback onto what Rob was saying, but I have a slightly different view on it. So from the differentiation, as Rob was saying, doesn't always have to be like a massively different innovative product. So, and I think where maybe that's some of the debates going on in the industry about is that if we look at, for example, when Apple was going out of business, bankrupt, I'm not sure, I think it was like early 2000s or something, where Steve Jobs was kicked out, and then he came back as a CEO, where they tried to get him to bring the business back. Like, one of the things that he did was just make the computers have those colorful boxes on the iMacs, and people started buying them because that was kind of like a distinctive, let's say, thing, a distinguished thing, because it appealed to artists, it appealed to creative types. So you can argue, was that just a distinctive thing, or was that part of differentiation? Because to me, that was more differentiation, because you still recognize that you're trying to appeal to a certain target market. And that's what differentiation is for me, is something that's centered around the segment, around the target market specifically, something that's customer-centric. And because you're trying to look at the consumer and then trying to understand what can I give them that's something that's might be slightly different, but it might not be massively different, or like Google and Yahoo, like Yahoo, I think, was dominating at the time when Google was starting to compete in that space. And what did they do different? They didn't have distinctive assets. They still really don't, the logo is, pretty straight up and down. Like there's no, I mean, they have some animation now, and obviously they have massive budgets to play around with now, but they never really had a distinctive brand asset. They really had a differentiation of the offering. They instead of giving you all of this homepage with all of these articles and different categories that you can customize. If you remember Yahoo, I don't know if there's many Yahoo people watching that used to be on there. I think it was like Yahoo Pages or something where you could customize what's the weather widget and what's the news widget that I'm going to get here and all this sort of stuff. And Google said, no, stuff that. We're just going to give you one page, white, search bar. I'm feeling lucky. That's it. That was a differentiating approach how they did something.
Yeah, it was.
It's
I think it was a great product.
Nodding, but I see Stef nodding, but I'm guessing that both the Apple example and the Google example, I mean, those, especially the Apple one, my immediate thought was those are great examples of distinctiveness because, and this is where we inevitably get into the semantic debate, right? Because you could argue that those colorful iMacs, I think they were, there was nothing special about them except they were colorful. That's just distinctiveness. They just put them in a pretty box, and it caught people's attention, and it helped sales, and it changed the brand. Or, Ilya, to your point, you could argue that was done strategically to target a specific market. And
I mean and that's why again, like I really like how you brought it together, Rob, with the Spectrum ID, because I do think it's all very contextual. Just a couple of things I want to pick out, and then I maybe we can wrap up because we're running against the hour, or I think a little bit over even. Just a couple of thoughts because these are the traditional I get into these debates a lot, and these are the arguments I always get. For example, small brands, this doesn't work for small brands. Again, the data has worked for small niches, for big brands, for categories, everything. The reason why we talk about big brands is because we know these examples. But in reality, this works on all scales. I mean, the science at least does. Again, that doesn't mean that it gives us the inspiration to build brands and to do stuff. And I think your example, Ilya, when you said about the small, like, let's say the restaurant around the corner, like, what does he have to do with the fact that big brands grow bigger and have more loyal customers? Well, the fact is, as a small business owner building a brand, you need to realize that first off, it's going to take a long time to build a brand. It's a very incremental game. It's a very long-term game. And the reality is you need to build mental and physical availability, meaning you need to be available at the right places, both mentally and physically. I mean, physically, that doesn't mean offline. You can be online, physically available as well. Those two things matter a lot. Do you have to be unique to grow? I don't think it's that much about. You can have a great burger in a certain area where you're available, and you can have 10 restaurants and be more available than the other one. Do you have to be unique? I'm not sure about that. I think that's where I question the idea. Like, just look at what they believe in, what they do. Just look at the marketplace and look where there's overlap and make sure that works. I think that's very important. I don't see that need for uniqueness as something that big. And I think that's just because I've read so much about it. But that's like my thing. And then one more thing I do want to say, like the idea of centering around the segment, and this is where I can give some personal examples, because the moment I started reading all this stuff, I did change the way I work in brand strategy, because I used to differentiate and pick a segment and build on that. I've built brands, a couple of brands where I really focused on this idea of Byron Sharp and targeting everyone in the category. And it has worked out great for these brands because we had a very open mind in terms of who we're going to reach in the category. And we didn't tailor messages to a specific segment. And it was actually very successful then. They were able to discover new segments that they had never thought would buy their stuff. And actually, if you look at Apple's audience, they always said, like, we're going to target creatives. But the reality was just regular families and people were buying these computers because maybe they wanted to feel creative as well. But so the reality is it's not because, and that actually shows that differentiation doesn't really work. You can segment and target, but that doesn't mean that people are going to perceive your brand as being made for that segment, and they're still gonna buy that stuff. So that's where I think segmenting is not always a good idea. Actually, if you can have a brand that is strong for everyone, I always love this example of Disney or Harry Potter movies. Everyone loves Harry Potter movies, young kids, old people, whatever, everything in between. Is does that mean, okay, sorry, but I mean a lot of people, millions of people. But does that mean that Harry Potter's story isn't strong? No, it just means that Harry Potter isn't targeted at a certain niche or whatever. It's just a good story to be brought. And I think if you
I
can be a
almost see that
brand
as
that,
a
yeah,
counterexample.
yeah,
I mean, Harry Potter is clearly targeted at a specific audience, right? It's clearly the effort or the attempt by J.K. Rowling, right, was to write for a specific audience. She wasn't. I don't know. I mean, I don't.
yeah,
Maybe I'm wrong.
no, but
She was targeting, I would think,
it was
whatever it is,
targeted,
6
but
to
everybody watched it,
15-year-olds.
right? Sorry.
Yes, and same with Apple. I actually feel like, so I think maybe there's a little bit of a blurring of the lines between differentiation and segmentation. I get why you're sort of equating the two, because I'll admit there is this saying sort of that if you try to make your brand for everyone, then you'll be relevant to no one, right? That you have to have a niche or a target audience. But I think that Apple's a great example of a brand that seems, at least, I haven't worked with them or at Apple, so maybe this is from the outside looking in, but to Ilya's point and your point, Steph, it seems like they have historically targeted creatives, the crazy ones. But to your point, it was so effective and everybody wanted to be that, even if frankly they weren't, even if they were accountants, working in a cubicle, that everybody bought into it. And to me, that's an example of potentially of differentiation working, right? Their version of differentiation was to position their brand as if it was for that audience. And it was effective. So I think I'm not necessarily saying that that's how it went down, but I just think a lot of these examples, they kind of cut both ways.
Exactly.
It's a
messy world, right? It's a very messy world. And I think, I mean, yeah, sorry, Ilya, go ahead. Let's try and maybe each give maybe like a final just statement of like what we've tried to learn and see, and maybe try to wrap it together.
Sure, I'll do my best. I just wanted to say that for when you're targeting someone, it's whatever customer persona is perceiving themselves as that particular identity, right? But equally, I think it's about who they are not resonating with. So when you say, Stef, for example, when you're targeting, someone like kind of everyone, I guess you still had to have some kind of a platform for your messaging, even if it was trying to target everyone. That's still your segment. You identify that you're going to be good for everyone, and arguably, like Rob said, when you're talking to everyone, you're not talking to anyone. But if you found that in your strategy that was the best approach and it's worked, great. Again, I'm not saying that. I think we're all on the same page in saying that differentiation can work. And I do side with Stef a little bit to say that I don't believe that it's always 100% necessary if you have identified that in your strategic approach. So I think Whiskas and Felix and like those cat brands that I think there's Hills, where Hills is like a very niche brand for cat food, and Whiskas is obviously the big leader. And Hills differentiated by making it about a niche product, whereas I think like Felix cat food were just the same as Whiskas, and then they ended up kind of having a good market share as well. So differentiation is maybe not like 100% necessary if that's what you identified in your market, but I think you still have to go through that process, I think, of strategy and trying to work out who your target audience is. And so that's what I've learned anyway, is that but whenever possible, I still feel that differentiation is ultimately with my clients, I will always continue to try and find something different about them. It doesn't have to be an innovation or complete revamp of the product or service, but it has to be something that's packaged differently or a big idea that drives them forward. Because I still feel that that's on a psychological or neuroscientific level, it's still something that drives a lot of the buying decisions. I don't buy that we can look at the statistics, but we can't know everything about. If we just look at the numbers, then we're missing half of the picture.
Cool. Rob, any final words?
Yeah, I mean, I love the conversation, and I think Stef, you and to the degree that you're representing Byron Sharp here tonight, I'm so glad to have this perspective, and I really respect the sort of different take on some of the traditional thinking, and I don't necessarily think any of it is wrong. You know, maybe that's kind of what makes this so hard to debate, is that we're kind of all right potentially. Because I guess, or at least that's where I net out. I haven't been convinced that it is a waste of time to look into opportunities to differentiate, whether you're building your own brand or the brands of clients. And so, Ilya, to your point, I would continue to look into that. I mean, I read something earlier today that was, again, sort of taking the side of Sharp on this, saying like, you know, we shouldn't waste years or hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to do this and come up with some positioning line that is complete bullshit. Well, of course we shouldn't do that, but I think it's all about striking a balance, finding opportunities to, whether it's differentiate or make ourselves distinctive, finding opportunities to make ourselves memorable and salient for customers. I think there are a lot of different ways to do it, and I guess I would encourage people to explore all of those ways without over investing in any of them to the detriment of the brand success.
Exactly. I think that's really, if anything, if there's one thing I would like people to take away from anything I've told her, is not that you should now become a Byron Sharp believer or loyal fan, since that doesn't exist, but just like realize that everything is very context dependent, and these like big truths about branding being differentiation, or the other way around, differentiation not existing, they're all very like, it's not true. And you just have to look at the context. And I think maybe one thing to take away that I think is very important, and I think we can all agree on that, is that if you start from the base point that consumers really don't care that much about branding, and you try to do your best to create a brand that does grab their attention, whether that's true distinctiveness or true product differentiation or whatever it is, you just realize that maybe this thing we all love is not that important for them. And I think that's a good starting point, because it makes you humble. It's also very customer centric. And I think we all agree on the fact that it starts there. It's just, how do we get their attention and what does that mean for them? All that stuff, that's very nuanced. But I really like what you mentioned, Rob, about this idea of like, it's a sliding scale and it really depends. But I would encourage people, if they haven't read Byron Sharp's work, just have a look. I mean, you can never know. I just wanted to show, by the way, this thing here. These are 3 books. If you're interested in this type of thinking, the more marketing effectiveness, and especially the middle book for people in branding, building distinctive brand assets, very interesting material. Again, this is all one side. The other books mentioned, Marty Neumeyer, Positioning by Al Rees, all very interesting takes. Let us know what you think about this whole conversation. I think it was a very interesting debate. I do feel we could go on for probably a couple of days, but let's just try and wrap it up here, and we'll be back for another topic, hopefully. So thanks everybody for watching. Thanks, good day, Frank, as well, for being in the chat. There were some questions in the chat, but we'll try to answer them after. So Ilya, Rob, thank you so much for this. It was good fun.
Thank you, Stef, for setting it up. Thanks, Ilya.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys. If you have, I think if the audience wants to submit any questions in the comments, or continue to do so, I'm sure we can find a way to reach them out to answer that in the comments as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sounds good.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Cheers.